All right, let's do a hot take, as the young people will say. This episode is all about why I am not migrating from Chatty, which is what I call Chatgpt, to Claude, right? If you have been on the Lord's internet and paying attention to all of the, not all of, but some of the AI commotion, you will know that there has been a great migration from ChatGPT to Claude. And if you are not up to date, I will give you the high level overview of why that is happening and just talk a little bit about my decision not to migrate, as well as why sometimes what looks like a values aligned decision actually derails your progress. Okay. If that sounds like something that interests you, strap up because I'm here for a hot take today. Okay. I'm sorry. I've had a little bit too much sugar. So I apologize. I'm already a little bit too wound up. Okay. I work mostly with seasoned entrepreneurs, people who have been in business for a decade or more. And one of the things that I noticed, particularly among this group of people, is that the longer you are in business, the more values driven you tend to want to be, right? When you're an aspiring entrepreneur or a new entrepreneur, you're not quite as aware of what your values are from a business perspective. Why? Because you haven't been in business very long. But the longer you've been in business, you definitely have a better sense of your values. And I'm not just talking about your core values as a whole, but I'm talking about business values, right? Which are slightly different. Okay. It's when we start getting a little more particular about different things. Like, I don't buy from people who blank, or I don't buy groups or do this or do that, right? So it could be political reasons. It could be experience, right? The more experience you have in the online coaching industry, as an example, the more you get a feel for the kind of marketing you like, the kind of gurus you like, the kind of topics you like, the delivery format, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And for the most part, I think all of that is good, right? I think it's trending in the right direction because what it really says is that you have learned about yourself, about your industry, maybe about your audience, et cetera, et cetera. So I think most of the changes that I see my seasoned entrepreneurs making seems like a great choice as it relates to staying in alignment with who they are and what they want. Okay. But as is true with almost all change, especially value based change, people tend to overcorrect, right? So if I don't know, dated a firefighter as an example, and it did not go well, then sometimes what happens is people say, "Oh, I don't date firefighters." And it's like, I don't think that was the point. Like, maybe, but probably not, right? So it's, "Oh, I don't date this kind of person," or "I don't buy this kind of thing," or "I don't blah, 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 blah." And I think, again, most of that is positive and actually close to correct. It's when we are overcorrecting, right? And particularly overcorrecting, which often leads to a delay in our goals. That's what we're going to be talking about, right? In this episode, I want to give you a few questions that you can ask yourself to be able to determine, are you overcorrecting? I want to share, of course, why I'm not migrating to Claude, despite not being a Trump supporter. I also want to share the number one group of people who should also not be migrating. Okay. So if any of that interests you, let's do it. Okay. So, a little bit of context, there have been nearly 2 million people who have moved from ChatGPT to Claude in the last few weeks. Now, that number may change by the time that you hear this episode, but at the time of me doing my own research, it was like 1.75 million people have migrated. Okay. And there are some people who are moving because they think the platform is better, right? There's some argument to be made that Claude does a better job of certain things like writing copy or whatever, right? However, that's not most people, right? Most people are actually moving for more political or what we would call values based reasons, right? Again, a little context. Some of the things that I've heard people say about why they're moving, and there tends to be the repeated people saying the same thing. Number one is ChatGPT's relationship to the Department of Defense. Another one was the fact that they donated 25 million to the Trump administration. Another one was about them giving open access to the government, right? So there's just a lot of things that could be considered a little more political and a little bit more values based as the main reason why people are indeed migrating from one AI platform to another, predominantly Claude, but also Perplexity and all these other ones. Okay. And so we're actually seeing this kind of thing happen more and more with brands where consumers are making more values based buying decisions. I'm thinking about what happened with Target not too long ago, right? Where people boycotted Target and because of their DEI policies and practices or lack thereof, depending on again how you look at it, and their stock dropped, their revenue dropped, just all of that kind of stuff. Okay. And so the question is not so much if you should be making values-based decisions. I think that is like a duh, right? Like I think we all understand the importance of that. What I really want to talk about in this particular episode is how, not if, do you make values-based decisions in a way that moves you toward your goal? Okay. Because a lot of my clients, a lot of my peers, a lot of what I see on the internet are very passionate. They're very integrity driven people. And so they tend to want to be in alignment with their values. Makes perfect sense. I think one of the things that we don't often understand, how would I want to say this? We often see making values based decisions as the same as how you make values based decisions. I know that's a little bit confusing. Give me a minute, but you'll understand what I'm talking about. Okay. Sometimes we don't see the connection between the decisions that we're making and the current results that we're getting. And so the goal, like the lens that you should be looking through regularly, constantly, as you're trying to make decisions, decide which directions to go, etc., should be based on your specific goals, right? What you should be doing with your time, your energy, your money, etc., is based on what is your goals? What are your focuses? Right. So I have a client who her number one focus is she wants to be a vessel for God. And she is using her business as a way to be a vessel for God. Right. I have clients who want to build $1 million businesses. I have clients who want to impact thousands of people's lives. Right. Being a vessel for God is a goal. Right. Building $1 million business is a completely different goal. Wanting to impact people's lives is also a different goal. They seem like they could be all the same, but in fact, they are not. They are connected. Okay. But they're not the same goal. Okay. And again, the objective is how do we get to where we want to be? How do we reach these goals, no matter what they are, personal, professional, faster and easier? Okay. I was listening to Kev on Stage. For those of you who don't know, he's a comedian. And one of the things that he was talking about is that his primary goal is for his kids when they are in their 20s and 30s and 40s and they have their own marriages and kids, that they actually want to come home for Thanksgiving. That is his goal. Now, his kids are young, they still live at home. So that's a long term goal, right? But you see how specific that goal is. And that goal really has less to do with his comedic career. And based on the goal that he has, one of the things that he was talking about, which I'm like, yes, I wish we really understood this, is that there are certain things, certain trade offs that he has to do right now in order for his kids to want to make that decision, right? Because his whole point was, in order for my kids to convince their partners that they should go to their parents for Thanksgiving rather than their partner's parents, they got to really want to come. We have to, and then there have to be certain things that are in place now, not just then, in order for them to want to do that, in order for them to vouch for it. And it doesn't matter whether your goal, again, is personal like his, or whether it's professional and you want to make a bunch of money. The point is you should have a North Star, right? These are all examples of North Stars. The one with Kevin on Stage is very specific. Yours also needs to be very specific, okay? Your North Star, hear this, I want you to hear this very clearly. Your North Star comes from your values, but it is not your value, right? Your North Star is your destination, right? Like they're not the same. Your values and your North Star are not the same. They should be connected. Otherwise, we got an alignment problem, but they should not be the same thing. If you need help with that, just FYI, check out our workshop. I'll put a link below. We have a whole workshop just around identifying your own North Star. Okay. So the problem is we are often not making decisions based primarily on our goals. Okay. That's the problem is we make decisions from all of our goals. I want to lose weight. I want to have a good marriage. I want to blah, 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 blah. And because we have so many goals, it can be hard to make aligned decisions. Another thing is that we make decisions based on our values, of course, because it makes logical sense. But again, there is a difference between making decisions from your values versus based primarily on your goal. Those are not the same. Okay. You could be a great person, a law abiding citizen, and never reach your goals. Okay. Like a good example of this is that you could be a Christian, you could love God wholeheartedly and never reach any of your goals. It sounds crazy to say that because we lump them together, but it happens literally all the time. Right. And when that happens, number one, you often live a life of survival or mediocrity. Right? You're essentially living beneath your privilege when you are a good person, but you don't actually reach your goals. Like a lot of times we just lump them together. Oh, I'm hardworking, but hardworking doesn't mean you reach your goals. Oh, I'm a Christian. Yeah, but Christian doesn't mean you reach your goals, right? Like you could put all of these things in place. It's like you could have great values and still not reach your goals. And depending on your own mindset, depending on your own wiring, your personality, you won't fulfill your calling that way. A lot of my clients are very impact driven, right? They have goals that where they want to impact things, they want to change systems. And it's what I want you to be able to hear in this podcast is that you will not fulfill your calling, your purpose, your assignment, whatever you want to call it, when you are making all of your decisions solely based on your values rather than primarily based on your goals. Your North Star comes from your values, but it is not your values. Okay. You might hear me say that 18 more times before this podcast is over. Okay. This is why self management is so very important, not to be confused with self improvement. I did a podcast episode on this a couple of weeks back. So definitely go check it out because I talk about this in much more detail. But like when people come to me for anything related to personal development or executive coaching or performance coaching, people call it all kinds of things. When they come to me for any of this kind of more productivity or internal focus coaching, what they often have called themselves like self-help or personal development junkies. Again, self-proclaimed. I'm not calling them that. They're calling them that. And unfortunately, they come in with this mindset of needing to fix themselves in some way, which on the outside doesn't sound bad. Yeah, I got weaknesses, I got challenges, I need to fix those things. But the problem with that thinking is that you're already awesome. There is not that much for you to fix. I know you may think there's a ton of things for you to fix because you haven't reached this goal or you see where you sabotage here. That's fair. Okay. But they intellectually understand and sometimes agree, right? That they're awesome. They feel like a good person. But the problem is their behavior says something different. They're approaching their life and their work as if they need to improve 87 things, right? I think about all the clients that I used to see when I was doing therapy. And therapy is different because it's often about healing a part of you that has been damaged, right? A lot of my clients have gone through severe trauma or they are struggling with addiction of some kind. And so in that way, therapy is often very reactionary. But coaching, particularly the kind of coaching that we do, which is performance coaching, it is preventative. I'm going somewhere with this, so just hang in there with me, okay? What we're trying to do is actually be preventative. It's about understanding what to focus on in order to reach your goals. That's what I want you to hear. And the number one differentiator, like I literally study high performance in a way that few people do. Okay. And it's mostly because most of my clients are already high achievers. Most of them are already high performers, but they still don't have the things that they desire. They still have not reached the ultimate goal that they want. Right. And so what I learned as I started studying the Kobe's and the Michael Jordans and the different people in different, both athletic as well as business, the number one differentiator between a high performer and elite performer is intentionality. In essence, it is being preventative, right? Think about it this way. Everybody in the NBA is a high performer. You cannot get to the league without being a high performer. You already have to be good. Okay. But even though everybody is a high performer, there's only, let's just say, I'm making the numbers up, so do not come for me. But let's say that there are 1,000 NBA players, which I'm pretty sure that there are not. Okay. At one time, there's thousands in total in terms of people who used to play, whatever. But let's just say there are 1,000 at one time, and 100 of them are elite. How do you differentiate yourself? How do you move from just being a high performer to an elite performer, from the 1,000 to the 100? It has everything to do with intentionality. It has everything to do with being preventative, right? I was reading a book, as y'all know, I tend to be a book person, okay? And the book was by Tim Grover rather. And for those of you who don't know who Tim Grover is, he is the high performance coach for Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Several athletes. And I love his story for lots of different reasons, mostly because he never played sports. And here he is working with the best of the best. I love a good story that has that kind of twist to it. But one of the things that he tells about how he got his start is how he sent basically letter to all of the NBA players on this one particular team, the team that Michael Jordan was playing on. Okay. And he was pitching himself and his services. Basically, everybody declined him except for Michael Jordan. And at the time, Michael Jordan was the best person on the team. So you would think he would be the first to be like, no, I'm good. But he was actually the only one that took him up on his offer. And part of the reason is it seems like they could already get those services. If you're an NBA player, you already have tons of coaches. You got the head coach, you got assistant coach, you got trainers, you got all kind of people who are supporting your career. So it's, why do I really need another person? But the thing is that Michael Jordan understood that there were places, even though he was already good, he was already amazing, right? Now he's being preventative. He's trying to get ahead of the game, right? He understood that this man can see things that I can't see, and him being dedicated to me versus these trainers that we currently have, they're dedicated to the whole team. They're not focused on me. This person would be focused on me and my growth. And so what I want you to hear is that in order for you to get to your destination, in order for you to fulfill your assignment, in order for you to reach the goals that you have set for yourself, it requires such a high degree of intentionality that you can't even believe. Okay. Which is why this whole, should I be migrating or should I not be migrating matters? Because if it wasn't for intentionality, this would be a non-issue. We don't really care. Do it or don't do it. Okay. But if we're after achieving something, if we're after reaching our goal, then it absolutely matters. Right. Because what I find is that it's easy for people to start. Right. But to finish, but to stay focused, that's a whole different thing. To actually finish your assignment requires intentionality. And so one of the main principles that we teach when we're working with people is the goal is to be internally led, not externally driven. Okay. Externally driven is you being moved by all kinds of things outside of yourself, other people's opinions, material things, trends, good news, bad news, etc. Okay. But to be internally led means that you are moved by your own motivations, your own desires. Okay. That is actually the goal, is to be moved, AKA make decisions in a way that is internally led, not externally driven. Right. Most people never reach their goals because they are externally driven. Doesn't matter what it is. We let all of these things outside of ourselves distract us and keep us from the things that we really want. And oftentimes people think their principles or their values are what's helping them be internally led. A lot of people who are making decisions to move from Chatty to Claude and other platforms are literally standing on the fact that, nope, this is one of my values. I don't make decisions against my values. And for most people, they would think, oh, I'm being internally led because I'm making decisions based on my values. But what I want you to be able to see is that just because you're making decisions from your values does not mean you are automatically, you could be, but it doesn't mean that you're automatically being internally led. Sometimes, and if you are being reactive, many times you are not being internally led, even if you are making decisions including your values, right? That's one of the main things that I want you to hear. Values driven decisions don't automatically mean internally led. So here's a big example because I know y'all probably need one. It's a show. I hear you, but what you trying to tell me? Okay. So let me think here. Okay, here's a good one that I see a lot with in our industry. So let's say that I have a value around accessibility. I literally just had a client talk to me about this the other day. One of her things that's really important to her is access. Okay. She wants to make sure a certain group of people have access to a certain kind of education. Okay. So value in this example is accessibility. And because the value is accessibility, her pricing is low, right? Because she's wanting to ensure that people have access. So let's just say that she had a $197 offer. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you should not have a low ticket offer. I never said that, friend. I'm using this one thing as an example. This is not a judgment against your entire business model. Okay. This is about decision making. Okay. So let's say she has a $197 offer, right? That she is offering because she values accessibility. Right. And so that's a good decision. Is it? It depends. Right. It really does. Right. Because in this case, what happens is because her values are one thing, i.e., accessibility, and that means her decision making is low ticket pricing, $197. What ends up happening is that she doesn't have the money to market, right? Meaning whether it's running ads, whether it's paying a social media manager, whether it's paying someone to just help her with their marketing in general. She doesn't have a strong team. She's not paying herself consistently. Her messaging and her positioning is not strong, et cetera, et cetera. And she can't afford to improve those things. Why? Because she has such low pricing. And since her marketing is not strong, she's not bringing in enough revenue. You see how this is a little bit of a cyclical effect? But here she is making decisions based on her values. But this is a great example of why making decisions based solely on your values is actually not always going to lead you to your goal, right? Which is the number one point of this podcast. This particular episode and the podcast overall is about helping you reach your goals because most people go to their grave unfinished. Okay. So on top of that, if your goal is, let's say, impact, okay, let's just say part of her value is impact right along accessibility. Then the question becomes, how impactful are you being by making a product accessible? Particularly if they never use or never get results from that product, right? So again, is this the best decision just because it's values alone? Oh, I want to impact a lot of people's lives, so I'm going to keep the price low. Okay, so let's say you sell thousands, but nobody finishes it. Half the people don't even open it. Or let's say everybody finishes, but they don't get any results, right? You see how just values by itself doesn't actually land us where we want to be? That's why you have to develop your North Star. And it's not just, oh, I want to help 1,000 women over 50 find joy. Like that kind of North Star is not what allows you to make strong, aligned decisions, right? Because there's too many ways, number one, just to define joy. And if we aren't clear, then we can't make aligned decisions. And aligned decisions, my friend, are what bring you to your goal much quicker. Done are the days where it takes us 20 years to get somewhere that was only supposed to take us 3. Okay. One of the best stories I hear about this is for those of you who know who Dr. Benjamin Hardy is. He is a organizational psychologist. I love all my people who are in psychology. Shout out to y'all. But he talked about how his goal was to get a 6-figure publishing deal with a major publisher. Notice how specific that is. It's not just to get a book deal. It's not just to get a book deal of any amount. It's a specific amount and it's with specific types of publishers. Your North Star has to be super specific, okay? And what's crazy is he was able to do this. He was able to reach this goal within a few years, whereas most people go to their grave having never achieved that goal, literally. And best case scenario, it takes them years, a decade or more. Or the other alternative is that they have so much celebrity, right, in another domain, then it's easy for them to get a deal. right? If I'm an actor and everybody loves me, then yes, I can get a 6-figure publisher deal for nothing. Like, just that's easy. But this is somebody who had no success. No one knew what his name was. He had not written any books before. He had not gotten any success in any other domain. Okay. He was new. And it still only took him just a few years to get that deal. That's what I want you to hear. And that comes from not just making values based decisions, right? But North Star based decisions. Okay. The main reason why I'm not moving from Chatty, despite I'm not a Trump supporter, okay, is I do not have the capacity to take everything that I've done and move it over. That's number one. I could go into multiple reasons, but this is the number one reason why I am not moving. Okay. I do not have the capacity. And when you are making decisions, I want you to hear this. When you are making decisions from your goal, not just from your values, then you have to factor in your capacity, right? Because from a values perspective, it might be a great decision, but from my capacity perspective, it is not. And the truth is, I have no idea when I will, because it is not a priority for me. And let me just add this, the number one group who should be unbothered is a bit strong, but you get where I'm going with this, who should not be bothered at this time to migrate all of their stuff from Chatty to some other platform is anybody else who is pivoting. Anybody who's in transition or pivoting, you need to be unbothered by this. This is not the time, because what happens is you lose momentum. You lose ground, right? Even when you don't think you do. Let's say I got a team member and they're going to do all of the migration. I guarantee you're going to be involved still. I guarantee you. Here's the last thing. Here's how I want to wrap this up, because I realize this podcast is longer than normal. History makers are internally led, not externally driven. Internally driven is not always as simple as values driven. It's about what's most effective and moral, which just is another way of being strategic. That's all we're really saying is it's about being strategic in order to reach your goal. And you can replace strategic with moral and effective. Michael Jordan left at the peak of his NBA career to go play baseball. And people are like, what? That's a decision that no one understood. Many people didn't agree with. But guess what? He came back and won 3 championships. Warren Buffett ignored investing in stocks, not for weeks, not for months, not for years, but for decades. Decades. Why? Because his personal philosophy was to only invest in companies that he understood. And what I'm saying, these are examples of people being internally led and not externally driven and still winning. Same thing. I read a story about Sarah Blakely from Spanx, who refused investors also for years. And most people would tell you can't become a billionaire without investors in your company. But it went against her own personal philosophy. And guess what? She became one of the youngest females to be made a self-made billionaire. One of my favorite stories to hear is about Howard Schultz, right? So I've read a lot of books about Starbucks. He is one of the co-founders of Starbucks. And he insisted on offering healthcare coverage to part-time employees, which is unheard of at most companies and definitely unheard of at that time, right? And many of the people, his investors, his shareholders, said, no, we don't think this is a good decision. He did it anyway. Again, internally led, not externally driven. One of my favorite ones, is the last one I'll leave you with, is with Martin Luther King. The number of people who were like, how are you choosing to run a whole movement in a nonviolent way, knowing that they are being violent with these people that are participating in the movement? So many people, when you read the story, so many people were against his way of achieving the goal. But one of the things that he talked about was he felt like it was the most effective and most strategic move that he could make. And my point is, sometimes you are going to have to make sacrifices, not self-sacrifices. To be clear, sacrifice and self-sacrifice are not the same. Okay. But if you only make decisions from your values and not also from your capacity and not also with the end goal in mind, the reason why the civil rights movement was successful is because the level of strategic, not perfect to be clear, but the level of strategic that Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders were. when you hear all of these stories about the bus boycott and the March on Washington, when you read behind the scenes, those things were so well planned. They were not random, right? And so for so many entrepreneurs, they're just not as strategic, right? And for many entrepreneurs right now, it's actually not strategic to migrate. Now, this doesn't apply for everybody. Everybody's make their own decision about what they think is best for their business, right? But again, when I say strategic, how aligned is it? How likely is it to help you get to your goal, right? The bigger things that you want to do, the change systems that you want to change, the calling that you have, the people's lives that you want to affect, sometimes you have to sacrifice things along the way. I hope you got something from this. Make whatever decision is best for you.